Hi. Today we're going to talk about how to handle it if you have a child who has difficulty saying sounds or hearing sounds, discriminating one sound from another. And we're going to do this in two parts.
Yes.
So the first part we want to address is when we have difficulty, when your child's having difficulty saying their sounds, what we call articulation, articulating a sound.
Right. Or producing a sound.
Yes.
So the first thing is that there is this period of speech development in which sounds kind of begin to enter the child's doable range, right? And that has to do with their age and how their articulators are developing and their awareness of how those articulators can be put together in order to produce sounds, what input they're getting, etc. They become better at that as they age, as you would imagine. So we don't expect all of the sounds to come in right away. So if your child is misarticulating sounds, it may be developmentally appropriate, it may not be. And so you get these questions asked of speech and language pathologists all the time. Is it okay that my kid still can't say this sound or whatever at this age? So I thought I would just start by giving you a few SLP norms that we look for when kids are developing speech sounds. So basically what you're looking for is in that 2 to 3 years, which is really when the bulk of kids' syntactical speech development is really taking off, right? They're able to say more and more. They start with single words around age 1, and then they're getting 2-word combos in that and phrases in that 2 to 3 range. And then by age 3, they really should be speaking mostly in kind of fuller sentences, right? And that's where the bulk of your sounds come in. But you have this kind of group of easy ones that come first. So in that 2 to 3 range, the sounds kids should be producing correctly most of the time, 90% of the time, right?
Yeah, we kind of look for this basically produced in all kinds of words about 90% of the time.
And in different positions of words too. So I'll touch on that in a minute. But you get these early kind of front ones, the P and B, right? P, B, and M in the front as well. You get these ones with the tongue kind of flapping up like D and N, okay?
Yeah.
And you
D
get
and the NG. I'll say the letter names. You say the sound.
D,
okay?
D and N, and then also NG.
Yes, N. Yeah, oh no, sorry, N.
That's fine. And then you have kind of more visible ones like H, which is a lot of air, right? T is another flappy one, t, t, okay? K and G, they're produced in the back of the tongue, but they're pretty easy sounds to hear and reproduce, k and g. And then you have more kind of ones with the lips like w. Okay, that's kind of an earlier sound. And then f, which is kind of a tougher sound, but it's real visible to kids. So it's often produced early, f, right?
And then you see that those
the teeth
biting,
on the tongue, right?
biting the lip.
Sorry, I said tongue.
Yeah.
And then Y. You often hear babies do that one early. Yeah. Okay. So those are your two. Those sounds should all be produced correctly in that 2 to 3 years in speech.
Right. And notice that it's kind of covering most of the range of movement in the mouth. You have the front, you have kind of these middle where the tongue's hitting, you know, the top of the palate, and then you have some where the tongue's hitting the back of the palate.
Yeah.
So
by 4, you get some of these more complex ones coming in that really require kind of, like a multi-level flexibility or more than one articulator kind of working together, right? So you get L, which is tough because it's this real vocalic vowel-like consonant, okay? J and CH, j, ch, are what we call affricates. It requires kind of air stopping, air being pushed and stopped kind of at the same time. You have what we call these fricative sounds, which have a lot of like kind of an interference in the acoustic waves, basically. So you get the S and the S and the sh and z, and then V seems like it might not be that tricky because it's visible like F, but it's got more voice to it, so it just makes it that one step harder because you're vibrating more. So all of those by age 4 we'd like to see being produced most of the time correctly. And then you have these few lingering ones around age 5 to 6. So in the age 5, R is one of the most tough sounds. It's why kids can make it all the way to adulthood, or individuals, I should say, can still be incorrectly producing R in adulthood. That's not normal. They should have it by age 5, but it's a late sound.
And it's a tough one. And it's why it's the one that kids struggle with the most.
Right.
Typically.
ZH, which isn't that zh sound we hear in the middle of words like measure sometimes. And then TH is a really hard one, and it has 2 forms. We have a voiced TH, which actually tends to occur more readily before the voiceless, because that's often one that kids have some discrimination issues with.
Right.
So by age 5 to 6, you'd like to see those last 3.
Right. So you might have kids who say, I want to go with you, and they might kind of put in
birthday.
Yeah, birthday. These are kind of typical things that happen. So, then the question is, okay, now they're 5 and 6. Well, actually, before this question.
Yeah, so you can have, the question is, when do I get help? When am I getting intervention, speech therapy for some of these misarticulations going on? And what is developmental versus not? I just gave you the ages. So if your child's past that age and they're still having trouble with sounds that they should already have by that age, that's one factor to look at for should I be seeking speech therapy. And the other would be, what's their overall intelligibility look like per their age range, which means how well can not just you, but others understand them. Okay.
Right.
So we often have this difference between the amount you can understand of what your child is saying. But if you feel like you understand 90% of what your kid says, and then every time you have friends over, they get like almost nothing, you have an intelligibility problem.
Right. Especially if it's an unknown context, right? So if you're just repeating words in a book, it's pretty, understandable. But if they're trying to tell you about something and you don't know what's going on, how much of this do you understand? How much of their speech?
So context is important to look at as well. So 19 to 24 months, that's where kids are building a lot of language, but they're also learning how their mouth works too at the same time. So you get this kind of garbly, with stuff happening. You can get I can understand what they're saying 25% of the time, maybe 50% of the time. That's pretty normal in that range as they're building those skills, bringing their syntax and their articulation together, right? In that 2 to 3 years, though, you really want 50 to 75% of what they're saying for you to understand. And I'd say by 3 to 5, 3.5 to 5, 4 to 5, that's where you're wanting it to be almost all of it, 75% to 90%. Right. By 5, really, you should be understanding 100% of what your kid is saying, and others should be able to understand as well.
Right, because you said birthday. I still really understand birthday.
Right.
But if I'm leaving off all ending sounds and it's
birthday.
Yeah.
And that means birthday, but none of your friends could have picked that out.
Right. Then that's certainly a more obvious reason to get intervention.
Right. So I just wanted to touch on the fact that children who are in this, I'm thinking articulation is a problem zone, don't necessarily, that should not preclude learning to read. So if you watched our other question video about when can I start teaching reading, if their age is falling in that reading readiness zone, that kind of around age 5 zone, you shouldn't let the fact that they may not have all their sounds stop you from starting to teach reading. And Rita's going to touch on this more. And I wanted to note that as long as you're using a program that's very sound-based, Pinwheels, for example, is level 1 and 2, actually provides you with a lot of speech therapy type strategies that will really help to clean up some of their production of those sounds as they're learning to read.
Right.
Take it away.
So as you're teaching reading, don't let articulation stand in your way. What you're doing is you're beginning some of the work that speech therapists are going to want to do too. You're going to begin to have your child notice, if you've worked with our Pinwheels programs, or any phonics program, that what kids are learning in this beginning stage is that a word is made up of individual sounds. And there are sounds at the beginning, and there are sounds in the middle, and there are sounds at the end. And we are beginning this process of, hey, we're really waking up our brains to now taking what we know as a word and understanding sound. And so you're doing really good processing work when you start working on reading.
And that positional understanding of where sounds fall in words can be very helpful to cleaning up their articulation, because you might have a kid who has a sound in an initial position at the beginning of a word, but they're always leaving it off at the end.
Right. So now we're waking up, we're teaching them to this idea that you're listening for sound. And when we work on teaching words, we're slowing down this whole process. So if I'm saying at, and I have a student who has, say, a hard time with that ending sound, putting any ending sound on a word. Now, with this sound to letter connection, I've created this visible understanding that we have k, at, cat. And when kids now see, oh, I got to put something there, I need to say something there, you're really beginning to work on the kind of processing and what we call discrimination work that kids need in their own phonological systems to aid them in their articulation. And we slow it down. We may even be giving them time to begin to try to approximate these sounds that they struggle with.
And text is very multi-sensory, right? It's making the verbal language, which is all they've dealt with up to this point, visible, which is helpful.
Right. And so we also have you playing a lot of different phonological games, phonological processing games. We often refer to them in Pinwheels 1 and 2 as multisensory games. And when we do that, we're helping kids not only take words and break them into sounds, but we're helping them take words that have more than one syllable and break them into syllables. And we're helping them have these visual representations of all the words in a sentence. So sometimes we will see kids who have kind of a muddied speech when they're talking and they start to get into conversation. They can make sounds, but their sounds get kind of muddy. They're not engaging in this really precise articulation. Or they might have difficulty inverting syllables or really hearing all the syllables within a word. And so you're beginning through reading to work on this deeper level of processing. And for many of our kids who just have this kind of muddy speech or this difficulty with multisyllable words, this is exactly the work we do to clean that up. We really work from the perspective of reading. So don't ever let sound development stand in your way. If you, for instance, have a child who's has difficulty making an R sound, and you're working on words with R in it, just make sure that you are always articulating along. So as they're trying to spell a word, or at with rat, they may not be able to say that R. They might say wet, right? That would be kind of a wet, kind of a distortion. You still say it, because most kids who have articulation problems can still hear the sound. They can still discriminate that sound when they hear it in others. So you just make sure you're being a good model for them while they're learning to read.
And then always remember too, we're proponents of getting that help, right? When we say don't let articulation stand in your way, we don't mean let articulation just go on and never deal with it too. You will have children who have these kind of problems that continue. S and R, often ones that can be really hard to clean up with just reading, right? And so get that help, get that speech therapy as well.
Okay. Hope that was helpful. Bye-bye.